It says I'm live. Hey, thank you for being patient. Y'all know I'm at work. So if I abruptly go on mute, it's because I have to. Alright, let's get going. We're at chapter 26, Stolen Innocence. I was taught that God knew us before the foundation of the world, and He is the author of our life's book. Our book was written from the beginning, when we first come into the world, to ending when we leave this world. He is aware of everything happening to us as we meander through life. He does not cause things to happen, but He does allow them to happen. At least this is what I was taught. Satan peeks into the book of our lives and realizes our destiny. It is his job to prevent our destiny from unfolding. He begins chipping away at our spiritual foundation at an early age. Oftentimes, Satan works through those tasked with protecting us. The innocent ones suffer. As we maneuver through life, we are warned not to tell anyone about our dirty little secrets. At other times, we are made to believe speaking up is wrong. No matter how many times I told my daughters they could come to me if anyone hurt them, a heartbreaking secret was kept from me. Demia, much like myself, was an innocent victim. She was a victim of stolen innocence. In this respect, I could relate to this shared experience. However, it was difficult to help her process what had taken place because I never processed my own hurt and pain. How could I help my daughter? I walked amid my pain as someone who was busy, confused, and broken. Now, I was being forced to pull this thing called motherhood together for the sake of my child. I could only help her with the tools I possessed at the time. I reached out to Tony's mother and told her what occurred. I began by sharing his violation of Peaches to his latest violation of Demia. She was shocked and sympathized with me. She talked to me woman to woman, something my mother, unfortunately, was unable to do. You know, Tony's mother, I like her already. But I dated a couple of guys where that was their baby. They were their mama's baby and they could do no wrong, no matter what. Always making excuses, always enabling the behavior. But not this woman, good for her. She validated my feelings toward Tony, even though he was her son. I confided in her and let her know I wanted him to leave and did not want the marriage any longer. She understood. As I cried, she began to pray for God to guide me through this valley experience. It was a welcome relief as she did not side with Tony. What could she say when he was obviously in the wrong? In talking with her, she mentioned that Tony's father had molested his own stepdaughter. Wow. Hey, Mariah, I'm doing well. Thanks for stopping by. Years later, the young lady finally found her voice and told her mother. Maybe these behaviors were hereditary, I thought to myself. His mother wanted me to send Tony home before he did any more damage. Only God can fix this, she shared with reassurance. I went to talk to Demia. And talking to her, I found out the sordid details. Thankfully, he had not gone as far as my daddy had gone with me. However, this did not make me feel any better. She disclosed that he had molested her more than once. Had I not caught him in the act, the sexual abuse would have continued and eventually progressed. I tried my best to make my child feel comfortable speaking to me. Much like myself, Demia had a difficult time finding the words to describe how she felt. She was hurt and confused by it all. More than anything, she was a 7-year-old innocent child. I let her know that her inability to articulate her feelings were okay. To be quite honest, I was still very much confused even after so many years had passed. She loved Tony as her father. He was the only father she had ever known. It sickened me to think about his role in her life as a father figure. When Tony first came into our lives, he completely took over. He put his foot down and insisted on Demia no longer seeing her real father because he wanted to become her father. I allowed all this to happen because I felt his intentions were pure. As a mother and protector, I reassured my child it would never happen again. Looking back over the entire ordeal, I began to understand why my childhood was being played out through my children. The very thing I could not understand about my mother, I was repeating. In my mind, I lost all reasons to criticize Mama because I ended up taking my husband back despite his betrayal. Perhaps the reason for my decision was I began to view my situation differently. I was never a victim of domestic abuse like Mama. Daddy violently abused her for years in addition to how horribly he treated his own children. Tony never abused me or our children physically or mentally. For all intents and purposes, he was a good husband and father who worked hard and took care of his family. Amid my confusion, I felt somewhat relieved he had not gone as far with my daughter as my father had gone with me. However, the pain was still the same. Wrong is wrong. Sadly, I was a product of my dysfunctional upbringing. We pattern ourselves after whatever it is we witness and experience growing up. Sometimes we do this subconsciously. We do not realize we are recreating our childhood experiences, good, bad, or indifferent, until it's too late. I certainly had no intentions of repeating my mother's failures and mistakes. When I first became pregnant, I made all kinds of grand plans for Demir. The first plan was to protect her at all costs. However, here I was, repeating the same mistake I was unwilling or unable to forgive Mama for making. What scared me the most was that the choices I made concerning this egregious act came so naturally. My ease of forgiveness had much to do with how my family handled the transgression. Without hesitation, my family forgave Tony as if they understood his actions in some way. After all, Mama forgave Daddy, and we all lived as if nothing ever happened. Forgive and forget was truly par for the course. We covered Daddy's wrongdoing for years. This is very much a part of how our family functioned, even though we were aware of and impacted by his transgressions. We allowed him to walk freely in forgiveness and forgetfulness. I forgive, but I damn sure don't forget. I'm not so sure if that's a good thing. Because when it comes to God, when He forgives us, He takes all of our sins and throws it into the sea of forgetfulness. And He don't concern Himself about those things anymore concerning us. But I ain't God. Anyway, we never asked Him out of our lives, though as adults we were still suffering the effects of His abusive nature. For everything Daddy had done, He was still very present in our lives. Therefore, this notion of forgiveness had been with us from the very beginning. Growing up in a religious family, we were taught that God required us to forgive. It would take me years to figure out that my knowledge of forgiveness was completely distorted. I assumed the boys should have been furious at Tony for what he had done to their little niece. I did not understand their attitude at all. They forgave him and moved on. It wasn't like, he stole some money. You know? I, it was perplexing to say the least. Tommy even stated he understood what happened between Tony and Demia. How you understand something like that? I don't know. Maybe I should have accepted if my brother could easily understand another man's sickening acts toward a child. Perhaps he was simply identifying more than forgiving. I did not see or understand this distortion at the time. Demia had been violated, and it seemed as though a simple handshake absolved Tony of all wrongdoing. Is it me? But that's weird. It wasn't like, he stole the bicycle. It wasn't like he told a nasty, filthy lie on them. And that's how they're behaving. The way the scenario played out with my brothers haunted me for years to come. I had no one to understand my frustration. I knew about God, but at this point, I needed a human being to hear my heart. All I had to comfort me through this confusing time were pills. My dependence on them began to increase exponentially. They became a constant companion. In the beginning, I used the pills to relax. As past trauma constantly invaded my mind, I began dropping pills to numb the emotional pain. When I did not have any pills, I simply drowned in sorrow and misery. I had so many questions for my brothers. How could I expect them to understand why my husband had molested my child? What could make them understand my heart? I did not want to say it, but the answer stared me straight in the face. Unless familiar with committing this kind of violation themselves, there was no way they could identify with Tony's behavior. Not having a male perspective broke my heart, but it was okay. I was able to cope because I had my pills. Allowing Tony back into my life certainly changed our relationship dynamic. It was never the same again. I had lost all respect for him. Continuing to stay married to him had nothing to do with love. It was sobering to accept I knew nothing about the true concept of love. I had been going through the motions and playing the part. I no longer considered Tony to be Demia's father. It was time for me to come clean to Demia. For once, I would be honest about her biological father, Kevin Murphy. Kevin Murphy was a childhood boyfriend whom Demia only knew as her uncle. When I finally informed my daughter that Kevin was her dad, she blossomed and became a better child. For some odd reason, I thought Demia knowing her real father would take away the pain I was experiencing, but it was yet another cover-up. In the short term, it seemed like all was well. Farther down the road, the pain behind Demia knowing her father would resurface. For now, I found a remedy, and it was much easier to simply numb the pain. I guess Tony felt the same way. He was abusing pills to numb what we were going through as a family. He kept me sheltered through this rough time. I was not involved in scoring the pills. Tony took care of this job. I was not out in the streets seeking a high and was grateful. However, it was no secret we were both hooked. In my mind, I had it all together since I was able to still work. Unfortunately, I had become a functioning addict. Chapter 27. My sweet little Demia. When I first met Tony, I had no idea what was truly happening in his life. Neither did Tony. He did not know anything about his real father until he was an adult. We really do not know what we are getting ourselves into when we meet and connect with people. When deciding to intertwine our lives with others through marriage, it seems as though we marry the sins of the mother and father. Tony appeared to be a well-adjusted person when we first met. He was the son of a preacher and knew about the Lord. His life certainly seemed to be more structured and disciplined than mine. He had a good head on his shoulders and always took care of business. Tony was also a homebody who loved spending time with his family. He worked hard and did whatever it took to provide for his family. With one despicable act, our entire world was turned upside down. I did not know my next move. Tony was not my lover anymore, nor did I honor him as Demia's father. He no longer had a say in Demia getting to know her real father, as far as I was concerned. I was going to tell her the truth without his knowledge, and when he violated her innocence, he lost the right to dictate to her as a father. One day, Demia and I were out shopping. This felt like the perfect time to reveal to her that Uncle Kevin was indeed her father. I'm just having some thoughts. I was always one to play games with my girls by telling them wild stories and convincing them they were true. It was our silly mother-daughter moments. I knew Demia was going to think I was playing one of our games, so I had to come at her from a different angle. We were walking around the store as I picked up a few items for the apartment. It was just the two of us since Janae had stayed behind at Mama's. You know, Demia, I began, before Mommy met Daddy, she had a boyfriend. In fact, Daddy came and took her from him, and she was no longer his girlfriend. Demia looked at me, ready to play one of her for real games. For real, she stated, not really believing me. No, you did not, Mommy. This is where convincing her had to start. Demia would not let her little mind imagine Mommy being with anyone except her daddy, Tony. Even though I promised not to allow Kevin in Demia's life, from time to time I did go behind Tony's back and allow Kevin to visit. She was not told he was her father. She only knew him as her uncle. Kevin respected my decision and went along with not telling Demia until we both felt it was the right time in her life. This is strange, but okay. This day felt like the right time. My child needed to know the truth. I wanted her to know that her real father loved her very much and would never cause her harm. Demi and I continued walking around the store talking, and I wanted her to become comfortable with the truth. I let her know that Mommy had a boyfriend and we were in love. We went to high school together and had planned to get married. Demia was now looking at me with a more serious face. She wanted to know if I was really going to marry my boyfriend. Yes, Demia, I stated. Want to know what else? We had a little baby girl together. Now my child was really into the story. You had a little girl together? What little girl, Mommy? Where is she? I could tell Demia wanted answers, so it was time to spill the beans. I let her know she was the little baby girl. She took the news surprisingly well, though. I know she preferred to come up with an actual baby girl instead. I explained that Tony was her stepfather and Kevin was her real father. I reminded her that Kevin was the uncle I took her to see sometimes, and he would buy her gifts and they would take pictures together. She remembered him. I went on to tell her how Tony and I met and how Tony wanted her to be his daughter. Tony figured if she knew him and Kevin, she might become confused. Therefore, Tony became her daddy. I admitted to my daughter I was wrong for letting this go down. However, it was time she knew her real father loved her dearly. I then apologized for being so short-sighted. "Where is he, Mommy?" she asked. "In Grand Rapids, Michigan. I have his phone number. Would you like to talk to him?" "Yes," she shouted. "Is Daddy going to be mad?" This was just like Demia, to always think about the feelings of others before her own. It sickened me to know my child was thinking about Tony's feelings despite him stealing her innocence. "Don't you worry about him," I reassured her. "Mommy will take care of everything. We do not have to hide the truth any longer, okay?" "Can I tell Janae?" She wanted her little sister to know. She was beaming with excitement. "Not yet, Demia," I stated. "Let Mommy tell her, okay? Just like I told you, I want to tell her too. Now let's call your daddy, Kevin." We finished shopping and walked out of the store to a payphone. I called Kevin Collect. I prayed he would answer. I had not talked to Kevin about anything going on, not even about telling Demia he was her father. This would be a surprise. Kevin answered the phone and accepted the call. I put Demia on the phone and told her to say, "Hi, Daddy. Can we say the rest is history?" Kevin was moved to tears. He was indeed surprised and stated that this call had made his day. Of course, Kevin wanted to know what brought this on. I did not want to talk about what was happening inside my home. I just reassured him everything was fine and she needed to know the truth. From this moment on, I watched my daughter blossom. She became a different child because she had a true sense of self. I saw her begin to smile more and realized she was okay. I had my sweet little Demia back. It was not long before I told Tony what I had done. He cried. It did not matter to me at all. Demia deserved the truth. Besides, it was his sickness that messed up their relationship. All right, chapter 28. Oh, brother. Title is From My Husband to My Partner in Crime. I don't know. Are you ready for this? Why is he still a husband? Shouldn't this title, this chapter, be like, From My Ex-Husband to My Partner in Crime? My sex life with my husband was a complete and utter mess. I was no longer sexually attracted to him. I would participate on... Okay, maybe I'm jumping the gun mentally. Let me start again. My sex life with my husband was a complete and utter mess. I was no longer sexually attracted to him. I would participate only to uphold my wifely duties. I used every excuse in the book not to even sleep in the same bed as him. It was easier to simply sleep on the couch in the living room. Before everything happened with Demia, I was struggling to enjoy sex and would never initiate with Tony. Sex always left me feeling nasty, much like when Daddy would rape and molest me. With Tony's true nature exposed, I had nothing left to give. Having him back in the home only increased my drug use. Y'all, I'm not really ready to read any more of this right now. I really want to stop reading at this point. If you want me to continue, you're going to have to come in the chat and let me know. Or you're going to give me a break and let me come back tomorrow. I'm just not ready for this. But if you really want me to continue, I will, just for you. Come in the chat and let me know. I'll wait. Because this is crazy. This is nuts. I wish I could play a song. That's what I really need to do. All right, let me take my mind off of this. I'm going to come back to it. Chit chat with me in the chat. Did y'all have a great weekend? What'd y'all do for Labor Day? She has been in the comment sections of the last video, and I think under the video of the first book in the first chapter. Yeah, she left a couple of comments. She did. Whew. And I appreciate her. She's not upset about me reading the book. At least she didn't express that. But she talked about, her mess being a message. There's a message in her mess. And God brought her a long way. And I guess it just occurred to me that, she was in the throes of her addiction. And when you under the influence, you just don't make the right decisions. And then you couple that with her upbringing and how she saw her parents' relationship. It makes sense to me why she made the same mistakes as her mother in that aspect. But from a normal point of view, it's dysfunctional as heck. Well, we all come from dysfunctional families, don't we? I've had a few people in the comment sections, especially when I read Tommy's book. There were people that was like pouring out their childhood stories and everything. And I was really proud of them because, some or one person in particular, I could tell that they never spoke those things, that the first time they were able to write out and express their childhood experience of abuse was in my comment section. And I'm sure that took a weight off of them. And that's one thing, when you have gone through shit or you're going through stuff, you've got to talk about it. Talk about it with someone you can trust. And unfortunately, it's a terrible thing when you excuse me, share something real deep and personal and they go and put you on blast to humiliate you That's a terrible thing. But they have to understand that that's just one person. Perhaps they need to go to therapy if there's nobody in their immediate family or circle of friends that they can speak with. First choice would be seek professional help. Because if a professional decides to put your stuff on blast, at least you could sue their ass, right? I know. Okay. I just need to talk about some other stuff. Take my mind off of it for a minute. Because this stuff is like really, really heavy at times. And mm, I'm trying to understand. I always try to understand people. It is crazy. Okay. I think I'm ready now. Thank you. Having him back in the home only increased my drug use. The drugs only served to keep our relationship, which is hanging by a thread, together. Drugs also helped me accept Tony back into my life. Once he returned, he did not keep as tight a rein on my drug use. I guess he felt that allowing me to freely use would appease me and keep him in my life longer. I'm getting so many thoughts like he's not going to molest Demia again, or maybe his own biological daughter. He's given her free reign to be on drugs now. So to keep her doped up. Mm. All right. I'm trying to make it through, y'all. I'm trying to make it through. Okay. Trying to make it through. All right. Once he returned, he did not keep as tight a rein on my drug use. I guess he felt that allowing me to freely use would appease me and keep him in my life longer. This unbridled access was a disaster in the making. Tony was the only person who could tell me no, and I would listen and take heed. Now, I managed how often and how much I used. To be quite honest, our marriage should have been over a long time ago. God knew what he was doing because the marriage sheltered me from a lot. We were both on drugs, but Tony closely monitored my use and knew when to say enough. He also purchased the drugs to keep me out of harm's way. He had control over the bank account and therefore made the drug transactions. For a while, only he had access to the drug dealer. At the time, I did not see the convenient setup. In hindsight, this was Tony's method of control and the only bargaining tool he had to keep the relationship going. It may not have been his intention, but it was happening. I was just living in the moment and not focused on the big picture. Tony was tolerating my escalating drug use because he felt he had to in order to remain with me. Tony had to have known our marriage was over the moment he was caught molesting my daughter. Is the marriage really over? Afterward, he lost control in the relationship and just kept the drugs coming. We were we both were covering pain. I was covering lifelong hurt and he was covering the fact I no longer loved him. He lost my heart that he never truly had in the first place. Tony lived on the dysfunction of my heart, which knew absolutely nothing about love. He learned how to turn my shortcomings in life against me. I was covering pain coming at me from every angle. Tony was afraid to face where he would be in my life had it not been for the drugs. Sadly, I was married to my drug pusher. Despite the sad reality, we kept our lives functional. The bills were paid, the children were well cared for, and I continued to work without drugs hindering my obligations to Motown. No one was able to tell we were out of control. Bobby was now back in Los Angeles after working on his album. He was so strung out on drugs he had to leave Los Angeles in order to finish the album. He voiced wanting to get some help but seemed too far gone. He began having trouble finding the cough syrup. Tony and I knew his struggle to find the syrup firsthand. We also started having trouble getting the syrup for ourselves. All three of us, Bobby, Tony, and me, were searching high and low, only to come up empty. When we did manage to find it by some small miracle, the price had gone up by the ounce from $10 an ounce to $20 an ounce. We had a cousin, Tim, my Aunt Margie's son, whom Bobby and I would get the syrup from time to time. He was using also and had found a place where we could cop some. We decided to visit Tim. It was our last resort after exhausting all our connections. Tim was happy to see us. He had recently married a girl named Marie. Of course, the first thing out of their mouths were to inquire about James and Janet. He and Marie had read magazines and was excited to hear firsthand information about the couple. We talked about the new it couple for a few minutes, then told him why we had paid him a visit. He let us know he would not be able to help us find any syrup, but had another remedy. Tim had heard about a concoction of pills. It's called Fours and Doors, he said. Tylenol 4 and a pill called Doradin. You take them together and wham, it will substitute for the syrup. I promise you, you will like it, and it will do the job. You will not get sick, Bobby, I promise. It's even cheaper, and I know a person who has the pills right now, Tim promised. We all agreed because we needed a quick fix. By now, Tony and I were exhibiting signs we had formed a bad habit ourselves. Bobby was no longer the only one among us struggling with a drug habit. We were too blind to admit how fast our habit had progressed. Tim took us to a dealer named Larry, then introduced each of us so he would not have to be bothered every time we needed pills. After purchasing them, we handed Tim some, then left. Tony and I started out using a set that were 2 Tylenol 4s and 1 Doradin. By the time we reached home, we were feeling the effects. Of course, Bobby had taken much more. His habit was too far gone and he required more pills to achieve the same high. We all agreed we'd like the high. After we arrived home, we called Kevin and Michelle, and they were on their way over. We let them know there were enough pills for them too. The girls still needed to be picked up from school. Michelle and I ended up staying behind while Tony and Kevin went to get the girls. Michelle and I sat and talked about our lives growing up. We had a lot in common since we were both biracial. However, she had a much different childhood than mine. Michelle had a white mother and a black father. She was also very supportive of her husband and his career. She wholeheartedly believed he was a great artist, even though he did not really buy it. Michelle was always pushing him to achieve something greater with his gift. Michelle is very talkative and enjoyed having conversations. The pills did little to turn her from being a chatterbox. Quite the contrary, they caused her to become even more talkative. I could talk your ear off, but Michelle had me beat. Her continuous babbling always got her into trouble, especially with Tony, who always complained she was getting on his nerves. Kevin and I was always protecting Michelle from Tony. Kevin and Michelle were really my friends. Tony could not have cared less if he never saw them again. In fact, Tony never hit it off with anyone. He had a nasty temperament, and it sucked at times. I would step into whenever his I would step in whenever his nastiness ballooned out of control. There were times he would strike out at family members. It did not matter if it was his side of the family or mine. He would just be ugly for no reason. Tony's nasty persona toward my family was tolerated because of our marriage. The boys put up with him because he was my husband. However, there were times when their personalities clashed. I was tired of making excuses for his bad behavior and was not sticking up for him as much. After he violated my daughter, I really did not have his back. If he came to blows with someone because of his offensive nature, I did not get in the middle. At this point, I was barely tolerating him myself. However, Tony did remain helpful to me in everything I had to do regarding my career. I did not love him at all, but felt obligated to have him in my life. He was there filling in for everything I could not and did not do as a mother. He was an excellent homemaker. While I was out working, he did everything to ensure the children's needs were met. Oh, look, chapter 29 is a very short chapter, but the title is James and Janet. Life was changing for the members of the barge. Everyone seemed to take life one day at a time. We were trying very hard to get the album completed and submitted to the record company. Out of nowhere, James' whirlwind romance heated up 1,000,000 degrees and blindsided the group. In between cutting the album, James decided to return to Grand Rapids. He took Janet with him, and they ended up getting married. It was done in secret, and no one had any idea it was going to take place. They told no one of their plans to elope. James was adamant about Uncle Bill marrying them. Therefore, he called them up, and they were married in the church's office. Mama did not know about their secret wedding until it was over, said and done. Surprisingly, she kept their secret closely guarded. I'm sorry, I said Mama did not know. Let me go back. Therefore, he called him up, and they were married in the church's office. Mama did not know about their secret wedding until it was over, said and done. Surprisingly, she kept their secret closely guarded. Okay, I read it correctly that time. Does that make sense to you? Mama did not know about their secret wedding until it was over, said and done. Oh, and then she found out. And then she kept their secret closely guarded. Okay, gotcha. I'm not sure when the Jackson family found out. Hopefully it was not in the same way I found out. I went to the store to purchase some cigarettes. The newsstand area was unusually busy with people grabbing and reading various magazines. I could make out very little what they were saying. It sounded as if they were saying James DeBarge and Janet Jackson had eloped. I pushed through the crowd. Lo and behold, the couple was on the front page of the magazine. James DeBarge marries Janet Jackson. They were pictured together smiling and holding hands. I grabbed a copy of the magazine, then went to the counter to pay. I was shocked along with the rest of the world. My brother, only 19 years old, was now married to Janet Jackson. They are too young. They have no idea what they are doing, I thought. I knew they were an idol. They had attended Motown 25 together. However, I never thought their relationship was serious enough for them to elope. Everywhere DeBarge went, the DeBarge-Jackson marriage was the topic of discussion. In every interview conducted, we were questioned about details of their marriage. We grew sick of it very fast. To us, Janet was like any other girl, and the media should get over the fact that she is a Jackson. Stars are people too. I guess it was a hard learned lesson firsthand how fans see stars. Fans will not just let it be and move on. After all, James's marriage to Janet ended up a huge mistake. They were too young and from two vastly different worlds. Unfortunately, James had to contend with Janet's family not being particularly fond of them eloping. This placed a tremendous amount of pressure on my brother's shoulders. He did become very close to Janet's mother, Mrs. Catherine Jackson. Janet was a quiet and busy girl at the time. She was filming for the show Fame while James was busy completing DeBarge's third album. It was a wait-and-see approach about how well the couple could withstand pressure from the media as well as the Jackson family. I told you, that was a real short chapter. Is that all she has to say? Huh. I wonder. That's all she had to say about that. A page and a half. Alrighty. Chapter 30. DeBarge is falling apart. DeBarge was working hard getting their songs together for the third album. Elle agreed to produce us again. We all worked with Elle on tracks for the new album. By this time, Bobby had lost his contract with Motown. He was never able to finish his solo project due to his ongoing drug addiction. Everything seemed to be going downhill for him. Since Bobby was no longer under contract, he had no income and lost his home. I was quite worried about him. He was in obvious turmoil and unhappy with life in general. His every waking moment seemed to be spent calling me on the phone. It did not matter what time my brother called. I got up for him. I was afraid he was having a nervous breakdown. The boys were just as concerned and began spending more time with him. Bobby was going through other personal issues in his life. He had just ended a relationship with his living boyfriend after catching him in bed with someone else. The relationship being over was devastating and driving Bobby mad. It was all he talked about at every opportunity. He told me all the time how much he loved him and how much he wanted him back. Bobby was distraught over losing this guy as though he was crying over the loss of a woman. Personally, I did not understand his strong feelings for the same sex and did not wish to hear him lament over losing a man. However, he was my brother and I loved him. Still do. So, I decided to see him through this rough patch. I had never witnessed Bobby be intimate with his male lovers before. However, my other brothers had knowledge of his interactions with males and would report to me about it. Bobby never acted feminine. He was very masculine in every sense of the word. In fact, he was not very fond of males. He considered a sissy, a man who wanted to be a woman. He was very vocal in his distaste for feminine acting males. Bobby dated men you would never believe were gay. I found the guys he was with very attractive and masculine. Basically, guys I would consider dating if I did not know any better. Bobby would often share his preference with me by stating he wanted the guy to be a virgin. He wanted to be the one who introduced the guy to his first homosexual experience. He would discuss with me how there were a lot of closet cases out there and people not being honest with themselves. Bobby told me I would be very shocked if he ever spilled the beans. Girl, did he ever spill the beans? And if he did you put it in this book? Bobby had a reputation of being the master of first-time givers. He had the uncanny ability to charm and turn out males who vowed never to have sex with another man. Wow. I'm going to read that again. Bobby had a reputation of being the master of first-time givers. He had the uncanny ability to charm and turn out males who vowed never to have sex with another man. That's because Bobby was a pretty motherfucker. I was taught from a biblical perspective it was wrong for a man to lie with another man. As a result, I would often voice to Bobby that sleeping with men was wrong. He would simply say he was born this way. And in turn, I would say, not so, Bobby. I believed in my heart he was introduced to this lifestyle by entertaining thoughts of homosexuality. More than this, I believed his sexuality had a lot to do with his poor relationship with our Father. Lately, every time I saw Bobby, he was high and nodding. He was no longer hiding his drug addiction, his sexuality, or any aspect of his life. He was behaving overly dramatic and acting out every moment of his life. Every little thing meant so much to him, and Bobby was draining my life. I received calls all hours of the night from him crying and complaining, yet never listening. I could never get a word in to offer him any level of comfort. He also had very little money left. Therefore, he was getting money for pills the best way he could, mostly from family members. The boys, Randy, Mark, and James, were there for Bobby in his time of need. We were all helping to support his habit. Little did I realize that the boys, minus L, were using the pills themselves. Life was spinning out of control in the DeBarge camp. James was now leaving Janet stranded at the set of Fame. She would call around looking for him, and he began straying out late at night, even staying gone for a few nights, just to get high with his brothers. I received numerous calls from Janet, worried about James. Elle was worried about everyone. After all, he was the only one among us not getting high. During this time, he felt as though he could not depend on anyone except me, since I was better able to hide my addiction and continue functioning. What are we going to do about this? Elle would often ask, very discouraged. We need to be writing songs, Bunny. They're messing up. I cannot find them half the time, and Janet is always calling, looking for James. L voiced his frustrations with the state of the group time and time again. He seemed to believe James was getting high at the Jacksons' compound now. According to L, the Jackson family were all wondering what was going on with James. L was also growing weary of Bobby's addiction impacting the group. One day he stated, I know everyone is worried about Bobby. I am too. But we have an album to complete. He was very emotional and had a worried look on his face. Indeed, he had a lot on his plate besides the album. To make matters worse, he was having major relationship issues with Roberta. Rumors swirled she had begun talking to the singer O'Brien again. Not only was this a concern for my brother, she was now pregnant. Elle wanted to believe she was pregnant with his baby. However, he could no longer ignore the rumors about Roberta. Elle went on to share with me a rumor that Janet was allegedly pregnant as well, and for the second time. Oh, damn. I began to wonder if perhaps Janet's alleged pregnancy was the reason the couple eloped. Word inside the family was that Janet allegedly miscarried during her first pregnancy. Now we were hearing she was allegedly pregnant again. Janet knew of James' escalating drug use. She was worried about him but never talked to me about how she was affected. During this time, I do not imagine she was confiding in anyone, including the Jackson family. I'm sure they had moments where they talked to her about how she was affected by the situation. Of course, I was never privy to what they may have said to possibly influence her to leave the marriage. One thing I do know, she was sticking by James and trying to keep his addiction hidden from her family. Eventually, James and Janet moved out of the Jackson family compound into their own apartment. Hey y'all. Wow. So did y'all know she was pregnant twice by James? All we ever heard is that she was pregnant and there's a secret baby. This is the first I'm hearing she was pregnant twice. Hey, I remember, shoot, I used to have this radio. I still have this radio. My daddy bought me when I was 12. But it was a box, from the 80s. Had a cassette tape in it. But anyway, I would sleep with it on. And I remember waking up early one morning and they were talking on the radio that Janet Jackson was married and pregnant. She's having a baby. She was like 18 at the time. And then you didn't hear nothing more about it. But, it is what it is. I'm just taking a break for a minute, if you don't mind. So they eloped because she was pregnant and she had a miscarriage. And then she became pregnant again. And she probably had another miscarriage. But you know what? That's her business. But James was her first love. And where would she be if she was still with James today? Where would she be? And all her husbands look alike. They're the same person. Renee looks like James. This last husband looks like Renee and James. I think she married James 2 more times. Till she hit the jackpot, right? Go on, Janet, with your bad self. All right. Chapter 31, James and Bobby. Each one of the DeBard siblings had their own unique relationship with Bobby. Bobby and I were very close in age and had a lot of shared experiences. Granted, they were very difficult experiences. Still, we were joined at the hip and fiercely loved and protected each other no matter the cost. Bobby and Tommy started out as typical brothers who were always at each other's throats. This eventually morphed into a love-hate relationship they carried throughout their brotherhood and career. Regardless of how much they fought, being a member of Switch cemented their shared legacy. Now, Randy was a brother who was always protected by everyone. We all made a pact early on to protect him at all costs. Mark/Marty marched to the beat of his own drum and was just annoying to everyone. Bobby was most annoyed with everything concerning Mark, especially his singing voice and him not taking music seriously. Everything was a joke to Mark except his obsession with healthy eating habits. He was both a health freak and a neat freak. A few years before he died, Bobby and Mark became extremely close. Bobby and Elle shared a close bond despite their age difference. They shared a similar musical style. While honing his musical gifts, Elle spent a considerable amount of time learning from and creating with Bobby. There was a pretty big age gap between Bobby, Chico, and the twins Peaches and Dakey. Or Ducky? I don't know. However, Bobby and Chico had a pretty solid big brother, little brother relationship. Chico has always been very spiritually gifted and loves to pray to this very day. While Bobby struggled with his spirituality, he never held this against Chico. Peaches and Daki rounded out the DeBarge clan, yet still held a special place in Bobby's heart. One relationship was a particularly sore spot for Bobby: his relationship with James. James Curtis DeBarge was the seventh DeBarge child and came onto the scene in our childhood when life at home was much different. He was too young to know the daddy and mama the five oldest knew. James only knew of wait a minute. If he was the seventh child, why would she say he was too young to know the daddy and mommy the five oldest knew? Okay. James only knew of a kind, gentle father whom he adored and followed around the house. Whenever Daddy moved, James was right on his heels. James only knew a father who sang songs to him and told him stories and funny jokes. He only knew of a father whom he could talk openly to and share his innermost feelings. James only knew of a father he never feared. He only knew of a father he loved so dearly and who loved him dearly in return. James had no knowledge of the deep level of abuse the first five of his siblings endured at the hands of his beloved father. He was not privy to the struggles we bore growing up in the DeBarge household with a vicious father and a passive mother. What little he did know was because we told him, and perhaps not in the most productive manner. He did not have the full scope since we only shared bits and pieces. See, all them children, they had a different childhood. James was a precious and spoiled little boy by Daddy and the older boys. However, not everyone felt the same way about James. In fact, Bobby resented this show of affection, and it was eating him alive. In his hatred, Bobby grew blind to how much he meant to his little brother. After all, Bobby was Big Bro, and James simply adored him and admired him immensely. He cared deeply what Bobby thought of him and wanted Big Bro's approval. More than anything, James wanted to feel loved by Bobby. Unfortunately, he caught the brunt of Bobby's rage beginning at an early age. James had no idea why Bobby treated him differently and harshly. However, James and Daddy's relationship sickened Bobby to his core, and he turned his anger and frustration towards his little brother. James never understood why. It broke my heart to see my little brother so confused by Bobby showing the rest of us love and affection and only showing him rage and contempt. We knew enough about Bobby to know it was neither fun nor advisable to be on the receiving end of his wrath. Fortunately, or unfortunately for James, he was not there to witness or live through the abuse Bobby suffered from Daddy. "Why does my brother hate me so?" James often asked. "Why am I the only one he picks on? he would lament. When Daddy still lived in the house with us, he was able to protect James from Bobby. When Daddy finally left, James was left to fend for himself and contend with the boogeyman living inside of Bobby. By James not knowing what was driving Bobby's intense hatred, he suffered prolonged abuse from his big brother. I can only lend validation to the terrible childhood James experienced being tortured at the hands of Bobby. Sadly, Bobby tortured James as Daddy had tortured him. Bobby had become the boogeyman and made James's childhood unbearable. He did to James whatever Daddy had done to him. Through everything, James longed for Bobby to love and protect him unconditionally. Basically, James deserved no less from Bobby what was given to the rest of us. For everything Bobby had gone through, he was still capable of being a loving, protective, and civil big brother. He was this way toward all his siblings, except James. The same way neither of us had to beg for his love, protection, and civility, James should not have had to either. With Daddy gone, James wanted and needed his big brother more than ever before. Sadly, when James saw his beloved big brother in trouble, he went down a treacherous path to relate. Perhaps James had concluded in his mind, if you can't beat them, then you might as well join them. So he joined Bobby's hellish nightmare, almost as if to say, let me suffer with you, big bro. James wanted to relate to Bobby in the worst way without knowing the true depths of Bobby's despair and what had really taken place between him and Daddy. James was in a one-sided battle for Bobby's approval and love. He wanted a relationship with Bobby, who wanted nothing to do with him. As a grown married man, James knew very little about what had happened to make Bobby turn this way. He was just now beginning to find out some of the details of the abuse we had suffered from Daddy. One day, I received a call from James, who was distraught and demanding answers about what Daddy had done to the five of us. Is this true, Bunny? Did Daddy do this? He asked. After sharing some of the details, because at the time the abuse was still very difficult to discuss, he began to apologize profusely. I am sorry, Bunny. I'm sorry Daddy did those things to you. Not knowing the extent of the abuse hurt James terribly. It also began to affect his relationship with Daddy, a Daddy he once held in high regard. I'm sure he talked to his wife about his feelings, and Janet did her best to be understanding of what her husband was going through. My heart went out to Janet and James. They were so young, and their marriage was suffering tremendously. They married way too young and both had experienced abusive childhoods. Janet was abused? I don't believe that shit. To add insult to injury, Bobby did nothing to make life easier for James. Hurt people, as the saying goes. I believe James and Janet would have functioned better as friends, more so than lovers. This was in part because they lacked the tools to love themselves apart from each other. I was not quite sure about Janet's level of understanding of love. I knew for a fact that James knew absolutely nothing about love, and he was not alone. Not a single DeBarge knew how to love themselves, let alone drag another individual into our mangled lives. Here we stood, sick children thrown into a world we were emotionally unprepared to navigate. We knew nothing about being responsible men and women. All we knew was pain and how to self-medicate. We were truly lost along life's path. From time to time, we managed to find our way. Perhaps God was on our side after all, I believed. Through the fog that made our lives difficult to navigate at times, I do believe we were kept. We were being kept. We were being kept by our maternal grandmother and grandfather's faithful prayers stored up before some of us were ever conceived. Those prayers were then passed down to our mother, her sisters, and her brothers. All in all, we had sense enough to hold on to this revelation. We were the kept ones. God's grace, His favor, and His mercy were very real. We held it close since it spoke of our heritage and legacy. Therefore, all was not bad in our lives. We had the wonderful Word of God keeping us while we were in our valley experience. All right, so that was chapter 26 through chapter 31. What y'all think about that? Hey, Shady Love. I read about it in the Daily News in New York. Debbie Allen was quoted saying Janet was leaving fame because she was pregnant. Mm. Yeah, I remember. And she probably was pregnant. She probably did have a miscarriage. You know, these things happen. And maybe it was just, then who knows. But I don't believe she had a baby and kept it from the man all these years. That baby would be about 40 years old or so. And they said she hid it out in her family. Just rumors. That's all. But, good for her. Um, you know, I would think, I'm answering you, Shady Love. She said, wouldn't it be great to be able to talk to Bunny and just ask her, how did she really do that? I think it was more drugs than anything else. And the comfort of, he was the person who scored the drugs. Um, he was the homemaker. So she depended on him in certain aspects. She was in her comfort zone, other than totally eviscerating him out of her life, and just making adjustments, perhaps having a babysitter or something like that, or whatever. She was just comfortable with the way things were in terms of taking care of business and having drugs in her life. Now, I'm not making excuses, because it does not make sense that you would have this man back in the house with this child. People do strange stuff. I can tell you, I would love to share a story with you all, but this is YouTube, and I just, the devil runs out here in these YouTube streets. But You'd be amazed how certain families deal with stuff. Like we are amazed here. But this was the 80s. Back in the day, 50s, 60s, 40s, women depended so much on a man. You couldn't do, and that's just the way it was designed. Like a woman, it used to be a time where a woman couldn't even walk down the street alone. She could only walk down the street with her husband. A woman couldn't even have a credit card. A woman couldn't even buy a house or a car. The only way you got these things is if you were married and your husband bought it. And so therefore they were so totally dependent that, their husband can beat the crap out of them. The cops will come and just tell her to be a good wife. And hopefully they won't have to be called again. All the while they're talking to her, she got 2 black eyes. And so now women don't need men to acquire things to make a living. They can do it on their own, but back in those days you had no choice. And so these men were doing all kinds of things in the family. Not all of them, but And they had to turn the other cheek. They had to take it. They had to deal with it. Because where were they going to leave to? Where were they going to go? Yeah, they could leave, but how were they going to make it without a husband when you can't buy a car? So they were forced to stay in the home and put up with stuff. But these days, I don't understand it. I don't understand when, the woman is the breadwinner. But, with Bunny, so far as we have read, there was a lot of factors that played in her decision. And I think the drugs was first and foremost. She never had to score them. She always had what she needed in terms of drugs. And it was just a comfort zone for her. She needed to be delivered. So from that angle, it makes sense to me. It's good to be able to look at a situation and dissect it and make it make sense. Even though it's dysfunctional as hell. But, it's good to try and understand stuff. When you have an understanding, it ought to help you to make better choices and decisions for your own life. Right? But hey, what do I know? All right. Anybody else like to come in the chat and say hello? Please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe. You can hit Madam Whip Ass on the $, the Cash App. All proceeds will go to the Jumanji and Diva Stainless Steel Birdcage Fund. Who's Jumanji and Diva? Those are my 2 parrots, Amazons. Alrighty. Would greatly appreciate it. Spell Madam Whip Ass just how it sounds. MADAMWHIPASS on the $. That is the Cash App. If you'd like to send me an email, it's madamwhipass7 @gmail.com. Madam Whip Ass, spell it like it sounds. Number 7, Madam Whip Ass 7 at gmail.com. Yeah, as many as speak up, it is double that stay silent. And when someone does speak up and they are um, baracked and humiliated about what had happened to them as a child, it makes others stifle and stay silent. And it's not a good thing. People really need to think about their actions and behaviors. But there's so many people who don't care about nobody but themselves. There's so many people out here who are hurt and they can't feel anything. They can't feel any joy or pleasure unless they're hurting somebody else and trying to make somebody else feel just as miserable and disgusting as they do. But not everybody understands that about other people. You know, some people go through life trying to keep other people sick like them. You know, it is what it is. But anyway, I'm going to go now. And not sure when I'll be back to read, but I gave y'all plenty to catch up on. Alrighty? Thanks again, and I'll see you soon. Peace.